but I feel like I'm always working against an uphill battle. That the mindset of schools is not geared toward children's emotional growth.
Welcome to the Relational Parenting Podcast. I'm Jennifer Hayes, a parent coach and 20-year child care veteran. Each week, I sit down with my own father, Rick Hayes, and discuss the complicated issues that parents face today, as well as some of the oldest questions in the book. From the latest research and the framework of my relational parenting method, we offer thought-provoking solutions to your deepest parenting struggles. Added bonuses include intergenerational wounding discussions and guest childcare experts. We will also start taking your parenting questions in episode 5, so be sure to comment with your biggest questions or email me directly at jenny@jennyb.co. Let's get started. For part 3 of our education series, my mama, Susan Estoye, is here to share her knowledge and experience inside of the public education arena. She has been working in the public school system as a certified school psychologist for almost 30 years, has raised 3 children of her own, and also runs a successful business with her husband, providing families with kid-friendly pets and therapy and service dogs for various needs. Peep the doodle faces on this episode's cover. Like our last 2 guests before her, she spent much of her career knowing that the education system was not quite hitting the mark, but wasn't sure how to make changes happen. She shares with us her recent journey into trauma-informed, child-centered care and how she helped to bring that knowledge into the school districts over the last 7 to 8 years. She has seen the powerful results of this type of training for teachers and how it informs their classrooms and serves the kiddos who need it most. The information in this episode is invaluable to parents and caregivers everywhere for ushering in the future of child care and education. Okay, we're here. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to the Relational Parenting Podcast. We are here with Mama Sue today, and she is here for the 3rd episode of our educational series. She is going to be talking to us about being a school psychologist inside of the school system. So our first episode, we had Sarah on, and she was an expert in the history of the education system and where the education system needs to go as far as being more child-centered. And then our second episode last week was with Caroline, who is a child psychologist outside of the education system, but she works with families navigating the education system. And this 3rd week, we have our very own inside the system school psychologist, and she's here to share her journey over the last 30 years of school psychology and how things have changed and evolved over time, and then also what she is doing to help train her district specifically on more mindful, trauma-informed, emotional-informed, child-centered care. Yeah. So go ahead and introduce yourself.
All right. Well, I'm Jenny's mom. I'm Sue Estoye, and also Jenny's mom. And about 33 years ago, I decided that I needed to get a good solid job I could sink my teeth into and still raise 3 kids as the main caretaker. And while I was very interested in neuropsychology and going on and getting a master's and even further in that, I knew I needed something very practical. And so I decided to work in the school system, went back to school with a 1-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 6-year-old. I don't recommend it. It was a full-time, very difficult thing. And we got through it. And
Because this was graduate school.
This was graduate school.
This was a master's, not your bachelor's.
And I had been signed up twice to get a master's degree in the previous 10 years to that, and moved first to North Carolina, then to Pennsylvania for your dad's job. And so this time I was determined. This was going to happen. New babies, not new babies. It was going to happen. And it did. And I started working, I'm on my 29th year. and will be hopefully retiring soon. Although I can't imagine really doing it, even though I say I'm going to do it.
You like being busy?
Well, I like what I do, and I feel like, I talked about sinking my teeth into it. I feel like the things that I started with were important things, and as a school psychologist, you are by yourself.
Yeah.
You are typically, especially in small districts where I'm not even in one district the whole week, you are the only one of you.
And how many districts do you work in? Because I don't.
2.
Okay, so it's still just 2.
It's 2.
Not just and still.
Yeah.
You're the only school psychologist for 2 entire districts.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so what they use psychologists for mostly is testing to see if a child needs an individualized education plan or an IEP. And so that is always my first foremost job. If they need me to counsel somebody and they don't have someone else to cover it, then they call me. But for the most part, those are the things I'm doing. And so over the years, what I discover is, yeah, that's important. And yeah, there are kids that I'm creating behavior plans for and all that. But I feel like I'm always working against an uphill battle. That the mindset of schools is not geared toward children's emotional growth. Yeah. And it isn't that people don't care. There are a lot of people that care. It's that nobody's trained and nobody understands. And the few of us who do are just running around putting Band-Aids on. Yeah. That's how I felt.
Like often. Trying to plug holes in a boat. Yeah.
And trying to figure out what's really going on based on how we were trained. Yeah. And the truth is they don't really train you in those more intensive things. You understand about mental illness, but what do you do about it is the hard part. Yeah. And the part that I always felt was lacking.
Well, and inside of a system like that, a large system, it's hard. There's red tape everywhere, right? So there's, even if there are people who know what to do with a mental illness or know what to do for child specific needs, because of all of the red tape and all of the process and procedures and chain of command and approval and all of the steps that it requires in order to get anything to actually happen. Yes. It takes weeks or months or however long that it takes. And by then it's like the child has moved on to a new classroom or, and so so that's always the conundrum. And when I talk to teachers, or like talking to Caroline last week or talk to you, it's like all of these teachers, they care, they want to do more. But it's like their hands are tied in a lot of situations.
Well, and the truth is, even those of us in the special education department, which is where I live, our hands are tied by all kinds of protocol. Right. The deadlines, the timelines, the first this, then this, that you got to get 40 signatures from the parent, exaggeration, before it's all done. Yeah. And so one of the things that the world created was response to intervention. Well, response to intervention is something that we've been doing in schools now for 15, 20 years, at least in Illinois. But it's been focused on academics. Okay. Instead of doing what you do in the classroom and trying your best with a student, maybe they get something like an intervention. We eventually say they're not making the progress. We need to refer them for an individual education plan. Yeah. And then I test, right? Okay. Well, through response to intervention, we have in place different types of reading, math, writing interventions, and we measure that progress with little benchmark tests. Then if they're not making a certain amount of progress over time based on all of that extra, then it comes to me and I do an assessment. Of course, there are a lot of other pieces in there that don't have to do with academics. But what we haven't had in place the way we need to in schools, and it's because of time and because of money and because of personnel limitations, We haven't had the social emotional side of the triangle truly explored, not in the schools I'm in. And so, especially since COVID, people have finally become aware of the needs, and we're finally getting some money funneled into that.
Where is that? So how are you now getting money funneled into that? Like,
federal government has given funds. Of course, they have to be used for those specific things. But I know, because I'm able to get people in charge to say yes to things that cost money that they didn't used to be able to. So even if nobody had talked to me and told me about those funds, I know, because now people can say yes. And I know that it's taken seriously because they're saying yes.
Okay. So there were things that you would ask for in the past to be done, or an intervention to be made, that the red tape or the finances of the school, there's no money to invest in that kind of training, et cetera. And now you're getting yeses, and you're getting to go do these trainings. And
so, yes. And I don't want to say we couldn't go to trainings, or we couldn't, do things.
Well, no, but specifically the social emotional ones.
And especially for teachers.
Yeah.
I could go to trainings.
Right.
But again, then I'm the person running around trying to put a Band-Aid on everybody. Right. So let me go back about 7 years, because that was a key change for me.
Okay.
This changed my complete mindset, my complete career. People had been asking me for the 20 years before that, what do you think's going on? Why are these kids getting worse? Why are they having more issues? Why are all the problems that we saw exacerbated and more difficult? And I had some ideas, and some of those were related to the chemicals that we keep passing down to our children since the Industrial Revolution, through the food and the water and the air and the things we touch. That's not helping.
Yeah.
But those were the things I was trying to figure out, what is happening in these kids' little bodies that makes them dysregulated, which wasn't even a word we used then.
Yeah.
And 7 or 8 years ago, I went to a training, and it was on trauma.
Do you remember what year it was? Was it?
I want to say around 15 or 16.
Okay.
And it was at least 3 or 4 years before COVID hit. Why do we measure everything by that? But
well, it's a benchmark. We used to measure everything by 9/11.
Yeah, that's true.
So it was a trauma informed training. Okay.
Yes. And I went with a social worker that I work with, ended up working with her a long time. And we went together, and I really didn't have big hopes for this training, but it was not something I'd heard of, sadly.
Like trauma informed was not something.
Yeah, traumatology was not a word I knew.
I didn't know that was a word. Traumatology.
The study of trauma.
It makes sense.
And so, Dr. Bruce Perry coined that phrase in my mind, but he's obviously studying that for years and years and years, and is a great resource. And so I went to this training, and they started off with a couple of questions, and then went straight into the brain science of trauma, and how those little pathways are built in
neurology.
All of us. Yes. Of course, here you have a wished for neuropsychologist person sitting there listening, and I'm getting, my body language must have been intense.
Yeah.
Because I'm just sitting there like, that answers that question. Oh my gosh, that kid. And I'm sitting next to Laura, and Laura's like, what is going on with you? And I'm like, this is the answer.
Yeah.
This is what I've waited to understand. It was emotional.
Don't get emotional. I didn't bring the tissues over.
But it was very, I spent the day heightened, and just, now I can't look at you because And so
look away
all day long as she spoke, as this person presented, I'm just going through kid after kid after kid. I'm like, that explains that one, what could we have done?
Yeah.
And so this is the next question, of course, that people like me who do what I do are asking themselves, then what can we do?
Yeah.
And this particular training touched on that a little, but not very much. So I left there that day.
Here's the problem.
Yeah.
Good luck.
I mean, it was a beginning. It was a beginning spot.
Awareness is the first step.
Yes. And so very shortly after that, that was maybe spring, by the next fall, I had contacted the co-op I work for that basically rents me to these districts.
Yeah.
And you can always give them input into what trainings you want. And I'm like, well, I know what I want. And we started off, there were training your team in trauma. And so I put a team together in the district I'm in the most. And it included myself and a counselor, 2 special ed teachers, and 2 teachers. And I was excited that I had these people interested. And we went to these trainings on how to train your school, because it was clear to me that if my mindset was changing, I needed people to understand. I needed these educators to understand how this was impacting their lives every day and the kids in their classrooms.
Right.
And so we did the training that year. Everything's slow in education. The next year, we trained our teachers, and this is exciting to me. When you work in education, you have to get evaluated once you're at my level every 2 years. And so after we did the trauma trainings, and the person that evaluates me came and observed one of those, we had them going through the ACEs, we had them understanding self-care.
What's ACEs?
Oh, ACEs is...
We don't know what that is.
I'm sorry. So, oh gosh, I haven't talked about ACEs for a while. So that was a study done many years ago. I believe it was the 90s. And this was basically done by an insurance company. And they wanted this information for medical predictive purposes.
Yeah.
And so they took a very non-inclusive group of people. It was basically middle class and basically white, which is one of the problems with the ACE. We look at it a lot, but we need more tests.
It's actually one of the problems with a lot of
things.
Earlier studies.
Yes.
Was lack of diversity and lack of women.
Well, and
being included in most studies.
This had women, but it had people who could afford health insurance.
Yeah.
And it had people basically from the middle class and a little above, I suppose. And they asked several questions on what happened to you. Yeah. And the study showed that if you had, 2 or more answers that were yes, maybe it was one of my parents died, one of my parents was a drug addict, one of my parents suffered from alcoholism, there was a divorce in the family.
So it was questions about their childhood
trauma up until age 18.
Okay.
And so then there were other questions about their lives, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, etc.
Yeah.
And so on. And if you fit into one of these 10 or 12 areas, I can't remember exactly how many, then obviously there are other traumas, which is another argument about the ACE. But it had a lot of predictive value for your health later in life.
Yeah.
If you had 5 or more, you would die 20 years younger on average. Mm-hmm. And of course, self-inflicted death is part of that.
And carrying all that trauma. The trauma,
yes.
Trauma lives in your body. It lives in your muscles and fascia and bones. And then if it continues to be unresolved for years and years and years, it turns into disease.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And trauma training involves so many pieces.
Yeah.
And self-care is one of them. And we wanted teachers to understand trauma is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
So you can, and sometimes it's just witnessing a traumatic event. Sometimes it's not something that's that big a deal, but maybe it happens over and over and over again, and it becomes a big deal. Mm-hmm. And nobody even notices that.
That's how divorces happen.
Yes.
It's a prime example. Tiny things over and over and over again for many, 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 many years, unresolved, turns into
sometimes.
You've been neglecting me in tiny ways for 20 years, or you've been,
Mm-hmm.
And
then finally something topples that over.
Yep.
And for children, I mean, divorce it's never smooth sailing.
Yeah.
Because they're grieving for their family.
Yeah.
And even the people who want divorce are grieving for their family that they thought they would have.
Well, and depending on, yeah. So, I mean, people, the parties who are splitting obviously are grieving for the future that won't be there, or the vision of the family that they wanted and didn't get. But children, especially depending on their developmental level, are struggling to even understand what divorce is, or why mommy and daddy, or daddy and daddy, or mommy and mommy, or whatever combination of parental names are no longer, living in the same house. Like, literally all the change can be traumatic.
Yes.
Just huge change alone can be traumatic for children. And if they are at an age where they don't understand it yet, there's an age of ignorance, and then there's an age of like some of that in between age where it's like, wait, what's happening and how does this world work?
Which I think can be one of the most difficult ages. I mean, they've even shown that adult children who are out of the house, it's a trauma for them. Yep. Because it's their whole view of their life
and identity and connection.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's one of them. And some kids might have handled that smoothly, and some kids may have struggled with that. Yeah. Depending on the whole situation. So all these things.
I buried it.
Did you bury anything really?
I know that maybe it never seemed like I buried it, but from 16 to 18, I buried it.
I could see that.
And I got cancer somewhere in there. I'm kidding. Oh, that's mean. It was evil.
I remember.
But I remember so you guys I was 16 when you guys started the divorce process. It took a couple of years, and I remember being ready for it and betting on it. Mm-hmm. And I had a bet with.
We're very cavalier.
Yes. And I had and that was and is to this day, not really anymore, but up until a couple years ago, was a coping skill of mine. Was just to be like, whatever, I don't care. Mm-hmm. But I had bet Josh. I had a bet going with Josh that you would divorce before I graduated high school. Wow. And he thought that that you guys would wait till Nathan graduated high school.
But nobody questioned
that a divorce was happening.
Except maybe Nathan.
Yeah, I think he was caught off guard. I know he was caught off guard. But anyway, one of my coping skills as a teenager was to pretend I didn't care and to dissociate. Mm-hmm. And that's an invisible coping mechanism. And I actually just did a talk last night explaining there was a meta-analysis of 53 studies done over the course of 20 years from maybe it was the early 90s to just before 2020. And the meta-analysis was actually just done last year. So they took these 53 studies, and it basically showed that parental influence, parental emotional regulation or dysregulation, parental behaviors affect children like across the board. No matter what, there is an effect. Mm-hmm. But what they found was that the effects they could pinpoint externally were almost non-existent. The only ones they could pinpoint were internal markers of shame, guilt, self-worth, lack of confidence, dissociation, those internal emotional things that kids just brew and sit in for years and years and years because they never learned healthy coping skills when they were little. They never learned how to move through an emotion, how to feel an emotion, and then how to talk about it or move, how to get it out. And even even something that seems so tiny and insignificant as their feelings being invalidated when they're 3 will then become an external coping mechanism when they're an adult. And so like that's part of what I'm doing with relational parenting is teaching parents as early as possible how to have healthy coping, healthy emotional regulation skills, which translate into healthy relationship skills with their children and with themselves, so that they aren't causing this invisible trauma for their children to deal with once they're grown and out of the house and on their own. And so
well, and just teaching those skills. I don't know what I was saying, but just teaching those skills when they're.
Hold on, I remember where I was. Okay. Sorry. So this meta-analysis was basically showing that a lot of coping skills and traumas and maybe even micro traumas that children are experiencing, they're either showing up in school as, struggling with their friends, but even more so than like showing up in their behaviors at home, it's not even showing up until they're adults, which is like the dangerous part of this, is that, oh, well, my kid is fine. Oh, well, my kid doesn't care about that. Oh, well, my kid doesn't misbehave, so they must be fine.
Right.
And that's the dangerous part of this.
And especially for girls.
Yep.
Yeah. And what I was going to add to that was when you teach those skills, when they're little, when you recognize those feelings and you teach those skills, they start to use them right away. Yeah. It's not like they wait till they're grown up and then they remember them.
They love them.
They use them.
They love them. They're like, I feel so much better. I've had a 2-year-old that I nannied for. I have had a 2-year-old come to me, and more than one, after I've taught them just like how to take a deep breath and let's take deep breaths together, or whatever, when it's like I gave them the green cup instead of the blue cup, and they have a full-blown meltdown, and every part of my body just wants to be like, it's not that big of a deal. Right. Like you just your whole body reacts to what
when you're
feels.
2, you want choices.
Right. So when you're 2, you have no control of your life and you have no idea what's going on, and all you wanted that day was a blue cup. Like, and that's all your brain can process. And so as the adult, teaching her, first validating, oh, that's so frustrating. I didn't know you wanted the blue cup. I'm sorry. And she's screaming and she's not really hearing me. And so I just sit with her and hold her hand and let her scream it out. And I just tell her, get it out, girlfriend, get it out. And she gets it out. And then I go, and with a 2-year-old, you don't even have to like tell them what to do. You just do it and they'll start copying you.
They'll mirror it. Especially things that are your body.
This feels really frustrating to me. And you just talk about your own experience of them like you don't say you're screaming, so it's upsetting me, but you just sit in your feelings and say, oh, this is so frustrating, or I'm so mad right now, and I'm maybe holding her hand and I just start deep breathing. And that baby, that teeny tiny little baby, will start doing it with you. And then the next time she was upset, I didn't teach it to her. I didn't verbalize it to her. I just did it in the moment. And the next time she was upset about something, she started screaming and crying. And then I came in the room to see what was wrong. And she looked up at me and she went,
yeah.
Oh, and she was taking like these really intense, and her whole body was shaking and she was upset. And she was clenching her fist. But I just remember, and she just looked up at me and she was just like taking these deep breaths. And when she was ready, I just waited. And when she was ready, she was just like, my teddy bear isn't in my crib for nap time and I can't find him, and she told me what was wrong. And I was like, do you want me to help you find your teddy bear? And she goes, yeah. And we went and found the teddy bear, and it was like what
awesome
just happened.
Well, and you have to let them calm, and the breathing is what does it. I mean, we regulate the babies.
Yeah.
Our bodies, when they're itty bitty, that regulates them.
We regulate them a lot for most of their life until they move out. But in different ways, though.
Yes. And then when they're that age, you can start just having them mirror breathe with you. And in schools, we teach it now. We teach it now. So you want me to go back to where I was?
Yeah. So we were talking about trauma-informed care and you training
the teachers.
Yes.
So what I discovered in the future trainings was that, of course, regulation comes through things like yoga and mindfulness and the Go Noodle and YouTube, getting up and moving by your desk. And you made a video for me of yoga for children.
Oh my God, I forgot about that.
And I don't know how many teachers downloaded that. And so the second time...
Should have made you pay for it. Should have sold it to you.
So the second time that year that I was observed, I had found a way to get us to purchase yoga mats. And this was before COVID. And a way to store them.
Yeah. I guess you can get them cheap
at
in
least
bulk.
30 of them. So for a school, that's a lot of money. And I had all of my grade school teachers, pre-K through 5th grade, at a yoga training for 45 minutes. And that was my second observation that year. Now, this is from a person who 14 years before that, I was practicing meditation, mindfulness.
Yeah.
And I have always walked, and I do a lot of that when I walk because it regulates me.
Yeah.
And I would not have admitted that to anyone where I work.
I didn't know.
No, because...
And I didn't know about it till I was struggling with my own mental health stuff in my 20s.
That's when I told you.
You sent me like a whole book of meditation and all these different like spiritual practices and just like breathing and being quiet and setting up a little sacred space where you can just go, like a little safe space and like just be with yourself. And I didn't know any of that, like when I was growing up, that was.
And then 14 years later, I find myself teaching people to do it when all I have done was figure out my own self.
Where did you learn it?
I learned it by listening to audio tapes. I learned it by CDs that had different
tapes.
Yes,
audio tapes
in my car with a cassette.
Yes. At least it wasn't an 8-track.
That was before my time, I think. So anyway, that
before you had a car.
Before I had a car, definitely.
So the 8-tracks were definitely around when you were a kid.
Before I had music in my room, right? I had a record player. So yeah, I mean, it was a process, and now I can look back and I can see how my interest in that probably grew out of something I felt that needed to happen.
Well, and even drew you to school psychology to learn about kids. And
Could be. But then all of a sudden I find myself, first of all, I don't want to train people.
Yeah, you're not a get up in front of people kind of person.
That was not my goal. I didn't want to speak in front of others and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I was fine at a meeting. Yeah. But somehow if you stood up at a podium and started to talk in front of 30 people, that was different.
It is different.
Or 50 people or whatever it is. Yeah. And so
now you're on a podcast. Look at you.
So, yeah. How did you do that? Yeah. No, I'm getting used to it. So, that's where we went with it. We went with this is what you can do to help kids with trauma. And then we came up on, I found a program that was someone else doing a lot of the training. And then I added to that with, actually bribed my principal to do this.
Can you say that?
I just did. No, I think she would have done it anyway.
If anyone wonders where I get my sass from.
I added a little to it. And she wanted the best for her teachers anyway. And so
wait, hold on. What did you bribe her with? Because I know it wasn't a real bribe.
It was a U of I thing. It was a stained glass U of I that came in a bar that we had purchased.
So you buttered her up.
Sure.
Yeah. You got her a really nice gift.
I said, the end of the year, if we can start these trainings, this is
Look how pretty this is.
I did. We may or may not have been drinking on the porch when that happened. I don't know. But yeah.
Are we going to have to cut all of that?
No, I don't think so.
Is she still
We weren't drinking
principal?
at school. We would never do that. No.
Yeah, we're talking about gift giving and drinking.
It was all in fun.
After hours.
Yeah, it was all in fun, and educators are allowed to have drinks.
No, I know, but the word bribe.
Oh, well, come on. It was not a bribe. It was a gift I gave her because she listened to me, and
it was a thank you.
It was a thank you. I wouldn't worry about this.
Okay.
No money changed hands.
Bribes don't have to be money.
Quit it.
I'm gonna edit all of that, but I'm gonna piece together the good parts.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that.
It's gonna be great.
So, okay. So I had found this program, and it sort of filled, and it came to me accidentally, and it was trauma based, and it was about relationship in school, about a school family. Instead of the factory concept of schools. And I'm gonna tell you a little story.
Ooh, we love stories.
A little story. When I was 6, I was in first grade, and I had a teacher that I think in my mind was okay. I didn't have a lot to compare it to.
Yeah.
And there was a little boy who sat in front of me, and he did not smell good. He clearly came from a home where there was neglect. And one day he spilled his milk. I saw it happen. It was a complete accident.
Yeah.
And this teacher not only yelled and screamed at him, she was making him clean up the milk, which is okay.
Yeah. Natural consequence.
Yes. A great natural consequence.
But also an accident doesn't need a consequence anyway.
No.
Just keep going.
He started to clean it up, and he bent over. And while he cleaned it up, she swung her arm and paddled him the entire time.
Jesus.
This was back up until I was in about 8th grade. You could hit kids in school.
Yeah.
And I have never forgotten that. Not only did she abuse him verbally and physically, she shamed him.
In front of everyone.
In front of everyone. And it traumatized me enough that I have never forgotten it. And I can't really tell you another memory that's clear about first grade.
Being 6 years old, yeah.
Not in that classroom. There's a little bit of Dick and Jane that runs through my head, but there's no clear memory.
Yeah.
Just that.
Yeah.
And also that I never liked her after that.
Yeah.
I knew that. And in my home, we did not treat people that way.
Yeah.
And that I knew as well. I have no idea if I told anyone about it. I don't know any of those things. All I know is that created a trauma in me just watching it.
Yeah. Well, it's just like reading or watch like the George Floyd video or whatever. Like it is well proven that secondary trauma occurs by witnessing horrible things, whether it happened to you or not.
It's why I can't watch certain movies, because it will stay with me.
We used to tease you about that, and I will publicly apologize for it, because about 4 or 5 years ago, I started to notice myself. I quit watching super violent, super horror movies, like scary movies always kind of stuck with me. But I also kind of I liked curling up with a boyfriend or whatever and watching them, and like being scared,
right?
Or going to haunted houses. And I won't do it anymore because I have nightmares. I've learned what my body, I'm very in tune with my body and my emotions now. And the last 4 or 5 years, I have stopped letting those things into my life. I do not feed those things to my brain anymore, because it's literally unnecessary.
I'm glad
trauma.
to hear it. Yeah. Well, yeah, I forgot what I was going to say, but it's Oh, and once I had kids,
Yeah.
I could handle even less.
Yeah.
Because every parent's biggest fear is the natural consequence of your kid steps in front of a bus.
Yeah.
Those are scary thoughts. And if you watch a movie about something horrible that happens to a child,
Yeah.
I mean, I can't even read those books anymore,
Yeah.
So there are things we know not to do to our brains, and we learn it as we get older. And unfortunately, a lot of our kids are exposed to this all the time, sooner and younger, and it's having an impact.
Yep.
Back to what I was training my teachers in. I keep losing my train of thought with that. So
it's okay. That's what we do.
We went through it.
We're highly supportive of ADHD tangents on this podcast.
And we got about 2/3 of the way through it, and these trainings, and COVID happened. Here's what happened after COVID. Everything changed. We could not all be in the same room together. All these physical movement things and all were out. We changed hands. There were different people in charge of our buildings. Some of our buildings.
Like different administrators.
We lost a lot of our people.
Yep.
There was a lot of turnover for all kinds of reasons. COVID was very hard on kids, but also on other people in education. It put a strain. And everybody thought that the first year after the original March date was tough. But honestly, the year after that was even harder.
Yeah.
And I think it was just the culmination.
21. Yeah.
Yeah. 21.
Because we were
22 school year.
Still. And yeah.
Yes. And you were in some kind of a limbo area where you didn't know what to do, and you still had to do these things. And there was all this testing and masks and all this stuff, and fear.
And polarization on both sides, and parents who are
there were all.
I don't
those
want to
issues.
put my kid in a mask, and I only want my kid in a mask, and
right. And so it was just a lot of stress, and that became the focus. And it wasn't that people didn't continue to do some of the things they had learned, and it wasn't that their mindset changed. It was just that they were busy trying to just survive.
Yeah. Survival mode.
And that's kind of what the kids came back to us in a whole different mindset themselves.
Yeah.
Some of them had been in bad situations. Older kids had learned that they can just do work online and not really do work. And so why should they come to school? I'll just keep doing work online.
Well, there's also kids who learned that they learned better online and by themselves.
There are. We didn't see a lot of those.
I've seen those. I've seen kids who benefited and quit going to school and just now do online school. Like there's online public schools, because they can whip through their stuff in 3 hours and have the rest of the day to be a kid. And
in my district, what we saw was kids who might have wanted to do that came back anyway, and because they wanted to be at school.
Yeah, there's a social aspect to it.
But the kids who were staying home, at least any of the ones I was aware of, were the ones not doing the work anyway, or kids who really needed guidance, with their executive brain to do the work.
Well, so they weren't getting what they needed at school.
Well, no, they weren't getting what they needed online, but they also found that as a reason not to come back to a place where things are just hard for them anyway. Because the kids I'm working with, school's hard.
Well, but that's what I mean is like a kid who was struggling in school before the pandemic, who has then now doesn't have to struggle in front of an audience and is at home struggling. And maybe their gift isn't
school
academics. Their gift might be building stuff or, whatever it could be. And Caroline in our last episode shared the analogy of if you try to make a fish climb a tree, they're going to fail every time. They're going to fail your test. Right. And so measuring a child. So anyway, I can see a child who struggles at school, feels embarrassed or ashamed all the time.
Absolutely.
And not every student can have a one-on-one teacher 24 hours a day, which is what some kids need. I can see them being like, that system does not work for me. Why would I want to go back to that?
Now we do offer in one of my schools basically an online version in school where you're not in classrooms and you have someone to help guide you. We do have that sort of in the middle kind of thing that we offer, and that has worked well for certain kids.
Yeah. Is that like a computer, like a separate computer lab?
It is.
Or?
Well, it's on computer. I mean, it is not a lab. It's just a room designed for that.
So is it considered a special education room?
No, not at all.
Okay. And then do they transition and like do lunch and breaks?
It's basically a credit recovery program, and they can participate. It's changed over the years. For a while, they weren't participating in other things. Now, I think other than lunch, now they are. It's been different every year, and it's not something I'm directly involved in. So I don't want to say, oh, it's been this or that all the time because I don't really know. But I do know it has seen success.
Yeah.
It's, kids who we know they have the skill, but they are not able, they don't necessarily need a special ed classroom at all because they have the skill
differently,
but they are not able to they don't have the executive skills to perform what they know.
Yeah.
And so those kids are doing better in that kind of a setting.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a pretty creative way to help kids get through the high school piece. And again, this is a small town, so you don't have 5 avenues.
I'm impressed that there was that one. I'm like that.
Well, and we also
great.
have, LTech, or, we'll bus you over to Lincoln and you can learn to be a chef, or you can learn to be a nurse's aide, or you can learn to do mechanics or computer tech, half a day. But of course you have to have your basic credits to do that.
Yeah.
And so there have always been those options, but we don't have, it's pretty much you're on track to go to college or you're not.
Yep.
Is pretty much what it is. So public schools have their limitations.
Yep.
And what my goal has been can I help this kid in the last 7 years? Can I help this child learn to regulate themselves? Can I help these teachers learn to teach the kids after they have regulated themselves to then regulate the children, and to use encouragement and natural consequences, and if they know the skill and they're connected and have a relationship with you, some logical consequences to motivate.
Yeah.
But not just say, you did this, now this happens.
Yeah.
There's so many techniques, and the more kids need choices, the kids who are who don't have any control in their lives, like the 2-year-old, but they might be 14 or they might be 8. And emotionally, they're still stuck.
Yep.
Because they never were taught how to regulate their emotions.
Yeah.
And so,
or they come from a home where there's abuse, or
there's all kinds of situations. Abuse, yes, where it's either, I'm going to take you out, or I'm not even going to notice you.
Yeah.
Those opposites. And we wonder why they're angry.
Yeah. And can't focus in class. Or there's kids who aren't getting meals at home and their only meal is school lunch, or like there are kids that are out there like stressing. And
even through all of this and not finishing up and not being able to implement like we wanted, I still have teachers, even the ones that had the training, they want to do it again.
Yeah.
They're trying to, other teachers are interested because they've heard about it, the new ones.
And because it's working. When they do it, it's working.
And I walk into a classroom in my grade school of a teacher who ran with it, and it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
It is a beautiful thing to see.
Yeah.
And I don't even think they realize how wonderful they are. And like there was a little boy in one of those classrooms. I'm trying not to, put anybody on the spot. And he came in, with counseling minutes and couldn't regulate his emotions very well. And he learned to go to the calming place and to hold a little doll that had the emotion that he often felt.
Yeah.
And that became his little doll that he held. And he learned when he needed to go there and do it and breathe and calm himself down. And he no longer has an IEP. And this just started in the fall.
What were his how did he show emotional dysregulation in the classroom? And then was there anything else besides him going by himself
Well,
to a calming corner? Because there's also, I have been a fan of like the calm corner or like the safe place, versus like a timeout or like
right.
a rejective separation.
Well, there were lots of supports for that. And one of them was that the counselor taught him the skills.
Right.
The teacher reinforced the breathing and the skills. So he knew when he was calm what to do.
Yeah.
And how to go through the steps. And then if, like, especially at the beginning of the year, he would get very dysregulated, maybe very angry, very fast.
What did that look like specifically?
I would call it a mild meltdown.
Was he screaming? Was he throwing things? Was he attacking other kids?
He did not get aggressive to other kids. Okay. He was angry with himself. I think that at times he would do little things to hurt himself, but mostly he was crying and yelling.
In the classroom?
In the classroom.
But like at the teacher? I just want to paint a clear picture.
Depended on the situation, because it wasn't always one thing.
Okay.
But he also had a teacher who could see his body language. He had a very expressive face. And
that's helpful.
So yes, and so you could see
it coming.
He would start to his body would get more dysregulated.
Yeah.
So there would be more movement. You might get a little pound on the desk or something like that. And then she would attempt that step in.
Yeah.
While he was in his emotional brain.
Yeah.
And to do the calming with him and remind him of what he could do with the breathing and preempt for him. So she was teaching him in the moment that he could go ahead and calm himself and helping him do that. And it didn't take long.
Yeah.
And this cracks me up. So another little girl joined the class. I think it was after Christmas or just before Christmas. And he was basically letting the adults that he deals with know that he felt like she could use the calming corner. And he was
I love it when other kids do that. They learn a skill and then they can identify it in other kids.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one of the things that, and some of my teachers look at me funny, like I'm crazy, but I'm the only one that does it. So I got to say it. I can't rely on someone else to say it. And I'll be like, if you get a new kid in your classroom and that child is dysregulated, don't worry about getting them to do work. Expect it, promote it, encourage it, focus on your relationship and focus on their relationship with their peers and have the peers do some of those things that they know how to do with each other and problem solving with each other, conflict resolution.
Yes.
Do that in your classroom with him or her first.
Yep.
Because the rest of this isn't going to mean anything to him or her.
Well, and the work will never happen if all you do is focus on the work.
It'll be a constant struggle. You're going to set them off. Yep. There's going to be a meltdown and nothing will get done.
You have to build a relationship with somebody before you're going to go anywhere.
And so relational parenting, relational schooling, right? We are, as always, kind of on the same path.
Yeah, I remember, so I was going through my yoga teacher training, my first one, back when or maybe I was in my second one. I had maybe started my second one. Yeah, because I had graduated my first one and then I had started my 500 hour. So I was a certified yoga teacher at this point in time, and you had reached out to me and asked me, you had just started getting into these mindfulness trainings in the schools. And I was like, that's so cool because I'm like getting trained in all of this stuff now. And I was working with, I was working at that time in the youth, at-risk youth juvenile facility.
Yes.
And I was working with boys ages 14 to 21 who had been put in juvenile lockdown for crimes committed. And I mean, these boys, I got myself an education from these boys because I grew up in small white middle America cornfields.
Mm-hmm.
And these boys towered over me, and they had grown up in extremely traumatic environments, and every single one of them had a gang affiliation, and et cetera, et cetera. And they were all bigger than me. And I went in there as humble as possible, knowing that I didn't know jack shit about their lives and what they'd been through. Like, I couldn't even imagine it on my worst day. And I went in there and I forged relationships with these kids, and I listened to their stories. And I was terrified, but I was also pretty confident. Like, I was humble, but I was confident in myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I was maybe determined is a more accurate word, not confident.
You come by that now.
Determined and humble. And, but I'm also a person who doesn't put up with bullshit. And
with a group like that, they need to know that early on.
Well, and so I learned real quick, like I had kind of a great personality for that work, because I'm extremely empathetic and understanding of almost any situation, and any motivation behind doing something, doing whatever action it is. But I'm also like, cut the crap.
Mm-hmm.
And those two sides of that coin, just happened to be what kids in that situation need in a lot of ways. But anyway, I went in there and I forged these relationships, and I asked the administrator if I could start holding Saturday meditations. I always worked Saturdays. I worked a 14-hour shift on Saturdays. And so every night after dinner, I think it was like 6:00 or whatever, the boys who wanted to come do meditation with me, we would meet in one of the sitting rooms on their block, and I would walk them through a 10 or 15-minute meditation. And then if any of them, a few times, one of them would stay behind and like talk to me about what like happened in their meditation with me, and we'd process together. But I was going through I had graduated my first yoga teacher training. I was in my second, and you reached out to me, and you were doing these mindfulness things in the schools, and you had started being like the trainer of everyone for these mindfulness practices and trauma-informed training and all of that. And you asked me if I would put together like a 15-minute yoga movement thing for kids in the classroom
that they could do like right next to their
their desk. So I had to put something together where we weren't like on a yoga mat and doing all kinds of fancy shit. It had to be.
We got them yoga mats later, but they didn't have them yet.
We can stand up and take a break right next to our desk and move our bodies, and then sit back down and refocus, right? And so I created a sequence and videotaped it for you, and I was just like, I felt so crazy and silly doing it. But
you wouldn't believe how many people I showed that to, like in trainings, like not just that school.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So did that, and that was the first time I was like, oh, we're kind of learning the same things right now. And then over the last 7 or 8 years, every time you come to visit and we're talking about the stuff that you're doing in schools, it's always kind of aligned with what I'm learning and doing in my life. So I went on to be a social worker. It kind of blows
me away, really.
Yeah. The parallel growth. And I believe in like, there's a collective consciousness, and especially with the internet and social media, information spreads, and like, there's, things go viral, there's trends, and that just means that a lot of people are becoming aware of the same thing. Right. And so I went on to, I was a social worker for a few years, working with adults with disabilities, and used my psychology and all of that, and conversations with you. And I, wrote behavior plans and implemented, it wasn't called an IEP
Right.
because I wasn't working in a school, but I would place adults with disabilities in certified homes in the community to take care of them that had been trained on how to care for someone with that specific disability. And I was the trainer. So I would train new host home providers that were the host homes in the community. And I also recruited host home providers. I would train them. And then I would also match a client to a home that was set up for their likes and their preferences.
And that's important.
And so I was the matchmaker, but I also then had to do all these evaluations of the client up front so that we could train the home provider on all of their needs. And I would write behavior plans, and I would write like daily, the technical terms are slipping my mind. But anyway, I was basically doing a lot of the same things that I had heard you talk about doing as I was growing up, and what a school psychologist does, and evaluations and assessments. And I was basically doing that for adults with disabilities and specific needs and all of the things. And then I left that profession to go back to being a professional nanny. And I started reading new parenting books and more, reabsorbing new studies and information. And then you and I started talking about what you're doing in the schools again.
Yeah.
And it was like every time you came to visit every year, we would like talk in depth about what we were doing in our lives. And it was like we were just growing alongside each other, like kind of learning the very similar things at the same time.
Ways to regulate our bodies and help others do it, right?
Well, and the importance of the emotional and mental wellness, especially early on. Like, and I took that into parenting, and you took it into teaching from the school's perspective, teaching it to teachers and counselors and administrators, because they're also primary caregivers. They become primary caregivers. They are with those children 7-8 hours a day, depending on classroom rotation.
And that is something I have tried to really instill in them, that if you teach this child these skills of regulation and conflict resolution, etc., they're not just going to quit doing it.
Right.
They're going to take that with them
for the rest
of their lives.
Yes.
And if they're a child that's experienced a lot of trauma, all they really have to have in their life is one key person each year.
Yep.
It doesn't have to be the same person.
Yeah.
But if they don't have that one person to help them with all of these issues,
safe person,
very safe, yes,
reliable person
that they have connected with emotionally, that they have a true relationship with, it can make all the difference. And that is something that I didn't say early on, because I hadn't even been trained yet myself. So I didn't really get that.
Yeah.
But as I've done the first training, and then we had COVID, I now this year am training my other district.
Yeah.
Because I had a goal. If I'm retiring, I need to get this done. And we have done 5 of 6 trainings, which is a lot of time for a school to devote, because you don't get that much. There aren't that many days where the teachers don't have kids where they can do that training. And so I totally appreciate that. And on one of those days, we kicked it off with not only my training, but we had a person come in and do mindfulness as well, who does it all the time, and to teach how to do it with students better. And I learned from my first training that I have to start with, a lot of you people are parents, and I want you to know that when I did this the first time and we started our training, I got texts, emails, and crying teachers in the hallway saying they weren't good parents. And I understand that. Yeah. And so I sent out an email to the entire grade school and said, hey, this isn't saying you've been doing things wrong. This is saying we have learned more information, and we are going to change our mindset to do it differently and to make you aware. It doesn't mean that you've been wrong. These are people who are good parents, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of young parents.
Yeah.
And so I started my trainings this year with that explanation. That was the very first thing I did, because I didn't want people to sit there and feel smaller and smaller. So the first thing I did with these teachers was basically let them know that they were good parents and that this was not a reflection on them, and that hopefully this will just give them some good ideas.
Well, and once I think this will be the third time we've quoted Maya Angelou with the when you know better, you do better.
Yes.
And so it's not an opportunity, like learning something new and reflecting on what you've been doing up until this point. Like reflect, yes, great. Okay, you've learned something new, and let's step forward into that new idea, that new problem solving technique, or better way, healthier way of doing things. But spending a ton of time lamenting about the past when you had no idea.
Yeah, I mean,
like there's no point. You didn't know you're human. Like you didn't know. You don't know what you don't know.
Right.
So anyway.
Yeah. So that's what I started with, and I thought, well, the best way to really instill this in them is I will give them an example of what I could have done better, knowing what I know now. Right?
Is this about me?
About us. This is about all of you. Just a simple example where I know every parent sitting there has experienced something like this.
Yeah.
So I used the car example. I'm like, every parent, every mother has been driving along with 1, 2, or 3 kids in the car
or more
and heard these things coming from the back seat. I said, for example, we're going to say my 3 kids are 5, 7, and 10. All right. And the middle one, the girl, I could easily have heard, Josh is touching me. Or
say it the way I would have said it.
Josh is going to touch me. That was a favorite, right? However,
because he'd go like this.
Yeah, he'd hold it right in front of you.
And it was usually his foot coming from the back seat, and he'd put it on my armrest because I happened to take my arm off of it for half a second, and he knew that I wouldn't touch his foot in order to get him off the armrest.
Mm-hmm. So he knew how to get a reaction.
Yeah.
So that's what I might hear. And then I might also hear, Nathan doesn't have his seatbelt on because in my car, you damn well better have your seatbelt on, right?
Also, I was concerned for his safety.
Yes. Now, I am not saying you did anything wrong.
Because I didn't.
No, you did not. So here's what I would have done back then. I know I would have. I would have said.
I was going to say, start with what you did do.
Yes. What I did do often, I'm sure, because I remember many of these circumstances, is say, Josh, do you need to sit on your hands? Basically.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would have said, Nathan, you need to get your seatbelt on right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to pull over and help you get it on if I don't hear that click. And you're not going to like it. Right?
Flashbacks.
Right. Exactly. And then I might have even said to you, you need to stop tattling.
Yep.
I might have. Not always.
I would heavily disagree with that.
Because there was a lot
always
of
got in trouble
voicing our opinion, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what you did. You had that anxiety about things, and you told me you were.
Well, it wasn't anxiety. It was they were purposefully torturing me.
Yes.
But I got in trouble for telling my trusted adult like I'm being tortured.
So here's what I would do differently now. I would say I would completely ignore Joshua, and I would say to you, the victim, how do you feel about that? Did you like that? What do you think about that? Right? And you would say, no, I don't like that, or something to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say, Josh, I don't like it when you pretend to touch me. Next time, keep your hands to yourself, assuming it's a hand, whatever it is.
It's always his foot.
And then I would have had you practice it. And at first it would have been, Josh, keep your hand to your, and then eventually you would have said it. I would have repeated it, and you would have said it in the correct way. And all of my focus was on you and teaching you how to say it to him. in a conflict resolution kind of way.
Can I add a piece real quick?
Absolutely. I'm not done yet, but go ahead.
Oh, I know. But so for me, for what I teach, and it's different because I work directly with parents, in those situations, and you work with a school system, so that there's going to be some differences. The thing that I would have done first is identified and validated how I was feeling. Whether I'd said it or not, I was complaining about him, right? So I'm clearly frustrated. And I need someone to reflect that back to me and validate it for me so that I know you are a safe place and now I can open my ears and listen to you, versus now I'm going to get in trouble because I opened my mouth. So from the front seat, it would have been, for me, it would have been, oh, that sounds really frustrating. You don't like it when Josh puts his foot up on your armrest, do you? And I would have been like, no, I don't like it. Or like you said, you could have asked, how does that make you feel? But first saying, like, as the adult, you knew how I was feeling. You could stop and pause and go, that sounds like she's frustrated.
I knew, and I could have gone that route. I especially would go that route now if you were further into it.
But why not? Why not?
Well, I mean, if I felt like you really needed to see that yourself, I may not have felt that you were that far into it at that point. And of course, this is also something that may have happened 10 times in one car ride. So, it might not have been, I'm not talking about a super emotional experience.
Well, so it doesn't need to be.
Right.
And this is how I teach parents to respond to their children is, if they are not coming to you with a feeling. So here's the comparison that I make. When you are married or partnered or, committed in a committed relationship, whatever that looks like, the way that you are counseled to bring an issue to your partner is you bring your emotion. You don't bring an accusation. You don't bring you did this.
I'm feeling this.
But you come to your partner and say, I'm feeling really frustrated right now. Or I'm feeling really sad right now because this thing happened. And so when we're talking about conflict resolution like that, bringing up an issue to your partner and prefacing it with an emotion immediately gives your partner context to they have a need, an emotional need that needs to be met, not I'm being attacked and I'm going to stand up for myself.
Right. And
the reason that partnered people don't know how to do that is because they never learned how to do it when they were a kid because nobody ever did it for them. And so the way that kids learn how to approach conflict in a healthy way is from our parents. And so anytime there's a conflict between the children, the parent has to model the emotion first. Whether it's a huge crying, screaming fight or the 10th time I'm telling you that he's put his foot on my armrest.
Right.
And so no matter how tiny it might seem, if we respond first by mirroring the child's emotion, it immediately disarms them and allows their brain to feel safe enough to hear your conflict resolution teaching. So
you can recognize it or you can ask them to recognize it, but you need to recognize the feeling.
Yes.
And then you can give them the skill.
You can give them the skill or depending on age and how many times you've already taught the skill. If it's the first time, you could ask once, how do you think you could talk to your brother to make that stop? And if I'm 7, or I don't remember what the ages you said, but 7, 8, 9, I am very much old enough to come up with a solution myself. But if I'm very adamant that I don't know, and you haven't really taught it to me yet, maybe this is a new concept for you at age 7, then give me the answer. Right.
Well, if I'd have been doing this with you when you were 2, you would have known it by 3.
Right.
Your language would change as you went along. And that's the thing I think parents also and teachers need to do this with a kid each year.
Yeah.
And we teach them how to read over and over and over and over again at different levels. You have to teach them the language to use at different levels. And so I would have done that with you.
Yeah.
That way, the guy in the back seat, first of all, he no longer gets the reaction from you.
Yeah.
And I'm completely ignoring him.
Well, and that's without you being like, stop tattling. That's what, like,
Exactly.
I don't get shamed
No.
for doing what's natural.
You are completely off the hook, but he's also not getting the little thing he was going for, which is dangling the bait in front of his sister and getting a reaction.
But that's what I'm saying, is that the behavior disappears without you ever acknowledging the behavior.
Yes.
So you emotionally, you say, that sounds frustrating. What do you think you could say to your brother to get him to stop doing that to you?
Mm-hmm.
And that also empowers me to stand up for myself. And when I'm 7, maybe I have a parent doing that for me. But when I'm 25, there's nobody around to do that for me.
Oh, sweetie, you just took my example.
I'm sorry. No, I'm not. I'm not sorry.
No. And I'll come back to you. And then I would have empowered you and given you the words.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would have said to your little brother, it is my job to keep you safe.
Yeah.
If you have your seatbelt on, you are safe in the car.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, you are not safe in this car.
Yeah.
Would you like to put your seatbelt on, or would you like me to pull over and help you?
Yes.
Simply.
So it's not a threat.
You don't need the threat.
You have 2 choices.
Yep.
You have to have your seatbelt on.
Yep. The expectation remains. Yep. You can do it yourself, or I can help you.
Yep.
And what I ended with that day with you was, I said, I have a very strong, capable daughter. But if I had instilled that skill in her early on, we might have seen her standing up for herself without having to be as adamant, the only girl among the boys.
Pushing back against everything.
But also I said, don't you want, if the example is, I don't like it when you touch me, next time keep your hands to yourself. Don't we all want to send our daughters off to college knowing how to tell a boy?
Yeah.
I don't like it.
And then if
when
they
you touch
tattle,
me.
They're not going to get in trouble.
Yeah. So it's a simple thing, but that skill of, and what I did was what
it seems like a simple thing,
but it's not.
Yeah.
And what I did was I took control for all of you.
Yep.
I was used to running around and making sure everybody was okay and everybody was safe.
Yep.
And you do this, you do this, you do this.
And that's the load that a lot of parents carry.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that we didn't have a lot of emotional connection and a lot of cuddling and all those things and recognizing feelings, but a lot of times it had to hit a different level.
Conflict resolution is where like there was love and connection and like understanding, and we talked about our feelings, but when it came to conflict resolution, it was like, what can I do in this moment to make this stop now? Instead of, here's a teaching moment.
There's one of me and 3 of you.
Yeah. Well, and that's like, that is the parental mindset of, I don't want my kids to be fighting. I need this to stop right now. I'm driving. I don't want to get distracted. I've got one kid without a seatbelt on, and you've got 40 things going on.
Right.
And there's this urgency.
Yes.
And so teaching parents how to how to self-regulate that urgency.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
How to be safe in their own bodies and know that nothing disastrous is going to happen right now.
Well, teaching them the skills of what to do.
Yeah.
So that they have it ready to go.
And then giving them the skill. Well, but they can't do that from an urgent place. You've got to do it from a calm place.
They have to be in their intellectual executive brain to do it. And so when you're hanging out right here where you are not reacting primitively, but you're also not reacting executively.
Yeah.
You have to breathe to calm yourself, to get yourself back up there.
You got to get out of autopilot, and we've got to take a breath, assess the situation and go, okay, I'm going to address this first, and then I'm going to address that, and then we're going to address this, and we're not going to threaten, we're not going to shame, we're not going to make anyone wrong in this situation, because every one of them has their feelings, and we just need to take care of each person.
And if I had advice for parents today, it would be, give your kids time to lay on their backs and look at the stars and have a conversation.
Yeah.
Because they don't get time to think and feel and just experience who they are. And I was guilty of letting you be in everything you all wanted to be in and taking you there and running everyone around. And I don't think it's bad to be involved. I think it's really good.
But we were busy.
They're busy, so parents are stressed, kids are stressed, and they need time to just be little humans.
And we also, I think one of my biggest regrets from my childhood is we did not have family dinners.
Oh, mine too.
We never sat down and ate a meal unless it was Christmas or Thanksgiving.
We were occasionally on a Saturday, but we were running.
Yeah.
We were running everywhere. And we tried really hard. I tried to keep Sunday. I remember time for that.
Yeah. But that didn't work out either.
started to leak into Sunday.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we at least had to go to Sunday school, go to church, come home and have lunch. And then we collapsed. Right.
Or we had plans with friends, or like and when we got older, there was tournaments and this and that, so many things. But yeah, that involved, but not overscheduled.
Yes.
Let them be bored is what I tell parents.
Yes.
Let them be bored. I want to tell you this, and then we really do have to wrap up. But I remember growing up, we grew up out in the country, we didn't live in town. And I remember we all gave you such a hard time for that. Because all we wanted was to be close enough to our friends to be able to run out the back door, jump on our bikes and go, cause I would hear stories of all my friends getting together cause they didn't need their parents to drive them there or whatever. And I was just always like, grass is always greener. Right. And in the meantime, having no appreciation for the wide open spaces that I had. Mm-hmm. And whether it was the summers, but it was the warmer months, and it was a summer, I think I was like 10, 11 ish. We had the collie pups.
Yeah.
And, Nathan and I had gone out. We lived on 3 acres. It wasn't all our land. Some of it belonged to the neighbor, but we lived on a big open field with big trees, and we'd climb trees, and like, it was beautiful. And we went out back, and Nathan and I went and we got the puppies, and we brought them to the backyard with these 2 giant trees that provided so much shade in the backyard. And we laid down in the cool grass, and the puppies just ran all over us. And I have this vision of like looking up under the tree and seeing the speckles of the sky. You probably can't hear me when I'm back there talking like that. I had this vision of looking up from under the tree and seeing the speckles of sky and sunlight through the leaves. Mm-hmm. And I was laying on cold grass, and these puppies were these tiny little 6-week-old puppies just like running all over us. And me and Nathan are just laying there giggling, and they're nibbling and that is like, it is a visceral memory for me. And it's one that I led a women's circle a couple of weeks ago, and I had everyone, we did a reparenting meditation and reparenting the self. And I had everyone go into a meditation and pick a scene from their childhood that was their safe place.
Aww.
I'm not going to cry. And when I was putting together that meditation, that is the image, and to this day and prior to that is the image that when I picture my childhood, that is the image I picture. Aww. And so and Lewis and I, we've moved out of the city, and we're still in, a little bit of suburbia, but we've got a little bit of land, and we've got, a field, breathing room. We've got some breathing room, and we're moving more and more towards that open spaces. And point is, I appreciate pieces of my childhood that I had no idea how much it mattered, that time to just be a kid, that time to just lay in the grass with puppies, to just lay outside and feel nature and be a kid. And, there was no car, there were no cars honking. There were no neighbors making noise. It was just me and the wind and the grass and the dogs and the trees. and my little brother and giggles,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and there are a lot of kids who could, you know, remember their entire childhood and never have a moment like that where it was just quiet and
Mm-hmm.
nature and, you know, joy.
See, it was really important for me to give you that, because those pieces in my childhood were when I had puppies, which was one time.
You had a horse.
And when I was riding on the back of a horse, which was for 2 years, and then it was over. You know, it's hard to give up something you've had that was perfect.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was on the back of a horse, that is when I thought through things that I don't think kids often get a chance to think through.
Yeah.
You know, and in between the thinking, there was, now I'm going to gallop, you know. And so I wanted you guys to have that opportunity. And I appreciate very much that you told me about that, because I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I hoped that you would remember those things. But
yeah.
You don't know.
Are there any last pieces that we didn't cover that you feel you want to share?
I think if I was going to say anything more about the school issue, it would be that when I think back to behavior plans I created before trauma, the things that, and as I thought through examples to tell my teachers about of kids who were extreme. Yeah. Kids who would organize a stoning of other kids.
Jesus.
Kids who were extreme. The things that helped those kids, the two things that I might have done right, not understanding what was going on with them and the trauma they'd experienced, were getting in a true relationship with their teacher. Yeah. And also having a job in school.
A purpose.
Where they felt the purpose, but also not only does a job build self-esteem, it keeps you in your executive brain.
Yeah. Keeps you focused.
And so having a reason to stay in their executive brain and having a relationship of trust and safety were the two things that got those kids through, that I learned to write into. Sometimes it happened by accident.
Yeah.
That would take too long to explain, but those were the things. And so I have kept that knowledge and added all of this other stuff to it. And those are the plans that I write now. And I feel like finally there are some differences being made that might be permanent for those kids. I have hope.
Yeah. Because we were talking a little bit before this, saying that you write behavior plans now based on the need behind the behavior versus we just need the behavior to stop.
Yes.
Instead we need to identify what that child's needs are and meet those needs, and then the behavior stops.
And, you know, and I don't blame them. People look at me when I say, well, if this child if they crave attention from an adult, that's what we should give them.
Yep.
We should give it to them all the time when we can give it to them positively.
When they're regulated.
Yeah. We should give them that attention. And, you know, again, we struggle with that in schools just because of personnel issues. Yeah. But you're going to give it to them anyway. Yeah. How about we do it positively? And then you're going to see the negative behaviors go down. Yep. And, you know, and you build in a lot of other structures with it. Yeah. But that, once you know, for me, it's targeting that need, the function of their behavior. And you also know that there's going to be that dysregulation piece there too. And that can be very strong or that can be very mild depending on the child. But you've got to be able to address that and address the function of their behavior and give them what they need. Yep. If I don't eat lunch, I get hungry. Yep. So let me eat lunch. Yep.
That's a good one.
So That would be my advice. Figure out
Let
what they
them eat
really
lunch.
need.
Let that be the battle cry of the parental and education revolution.
Yes. Yes. All those environmental things are really very important to children.
Yeah.
So food and drink and sleep.
Awesome.
A lot of love.
Well, thanks
I
for
love
doing
you.
the podcast. I love you. Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you for being here. I hope that you picked up plenty of wonderful nuggets from my mama. And we will see you next week for episode 4 of the education series. And as always, if you have any questions, please go to the YouTube channel and leave a comment there. We can always answer your questions on the podcast, doing on different podcast episodes. So, all right. Bye, everybody. If someone came to mind while you were listening to this episode, or you are wishing you had a friend to digest it with, I would be so honored if you shared this link from this episode with them. I myself have always benefited from community and sharing, and I truly believe that it takes a village to raise a child. Our society has become so independent from one another, and parenting these days is often a lonely journey. But it doesn't have to be that way. That's why I'm here. If you have been seeking a more intentional approach to parenting, but you aren't sure where to start, I would love to hear from you. You can find me and all of my offerings at www.jennyb.co. And come follow me on all major social media platforms. It fills my heart to hear your stories, where you come from, and your big goals for raising the next generation. And don't forget, comment your parenting question on our YouTube channel, The Relational Parenting Podcast, to get it answered on one of our future episodes. If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit the subscribe button so you never miss out. I am so grateful that you are here, and always remember, you are never alone. I'll see you next week. This show is intended for education and entertainment purposes only. We will discuss things like mental health, abuse, PTSD, and other potentially triggering subjects. Please listen at your own discretion, and this podcast is not intended for anyone under the age of 18.